right, guys, so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about saddles, and I got two of my saddles out here. I've got this one here, which is a wade saddle, or what they call a slick fork saddle. And then I got this one over here, which is what they call a swell fork saddle. Now I'm going to put some still pictures in here to kind of show you the big differences between a slick fork or a wade tree saddle and a swell fork saddle. One thing that people, kind of a misconception about a wade saddle is that it's a stronger saddle, it's better for your horse's back. That's not necessarily true. A good tree maker, a good saddle maker can make a swell fork saddle just as strong, just as comfortable for your horse as any wade saddle. Some of the big clinicians, primarily Ray Hunt and Buck Brannaman, they kind of made a resurgence in the wade saddles. But one reason that I like a wade saddle is, one, it's for the big horn. This saddle has a great big horn so that when I'm doing roping, I don't have to take as many wraps around my saddle horn to slow the cow down or the horse to get them stopped. I only need to take just a couple of wraps on this horn versus taking more wraps on the smaller horn. The big difference, the major difference between the wade saddles and the swell fork saddles is the swells on the saddles. So when I'm sitting in an A fork or a wade saddle or a slick fork, the wades are called wade saddles, slick forks, or A forks, and all that means is the shape of the front of the saddle, the front of the saddle right here. That's what I'm talking about. When I'm riding in this saddle here in a wade, I don't have anything to catch my knees. So if I'm riding a horse and he gets a little bit squirrely, then my knees won't have anything to catch, or my thighs won't have anything to catch and help hold me in the saddle. You can get things to put on a wade saddle. They bolt in right here, screw in right here, and they're called buck and rolls. And basically it just adds a little swell to the saddle so your thighs can catch those buck and rolls. If you're going to ride in a wade with buck and rolls on it, you might want to get a swell fork saddle with that built into the saddle. I'll ride a lot of my youngsters, a lot of squirrely horses, or if I'm doing something fast like cutting, then I will most likely be riding in my swell fork saddle because these help keep me in the saddle a little bit better than not having the swells. But I do enjoy this saddle a lot. I enjoy the horn. I enjoy the fit. It's a great saddle. I think most people that own wades probably own wades because they probably heard something down the line that it does fit a horse's back better. One thing that people say that a lot of the wades have is that it has the horn closer to the horse's withers, so you're not torquing the withers when you're roping. Like I said, any good saddle maker can make a swell fork low enough to the horse so you're not pulling on them, and they can make it just as comfortable for the horse as a wade. So I think a lot of that comes to personal preference. You'll also see when you start getting into cowboying and looking at cowboys and what they ride, a lot of it just depends on where they're from geographically. Swell forks are a lot of times ridden in, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, the Dakotas. A lot of Montana rides in slick forks, in swells. And then the wades usually come from Oregon, Idaho, California, Washington, stuff like that. Because the wade saddle was actually designed by, I believe it was by Tom Dorrance. Might have been Bill, but one of the Dorrance brothers actually designed the wade saddle, and they were from Oregon, so it kind of became popular in that area. Just some parts of the saddle. This will be your saddle horn. The part that's in front of you when you're sitting on it, whether it's the A fork or a swell fork, this is what they call a pommel or a fork. This part back here where your butt goes, that's called a cantle. And then of course, this is what I call a rope strap. It's an Oregon crossover rope strap. It just holds my rope on my saddle when I'm riding. Your cinches. Most saddles are what they call double rigged. So double rigged means I have a rear cinch and I have a front cinch. If your saddle's designed and built, and you'll know if it's designed and built by, you'll have D-rings in the back of your saddle. If it's designed to be ridden with a rear cinch, then ride it with a rear cinch. And ride it with that rear cinch kind of snug, because the whole purpose of the rear cinch is to keep the saddle steady on your horse. If I were to ride this saddle with just my front cinch, then there's nothing holding the back down. So even when I'm cantering or jogging or riding over rough country, the back of the saddle can start flip-flopping on the back of my horse. If I have the cinch on, then it's not going to flip-flop, and it's going to hold the saddle much more secure to the horse. You can get your saddles in, you'll hear a term called rough out or smooth. And I guess this saddle here is that's my newest one. And this at one time had a rough out seat. And what that means is that the smooth side of the leather, like your boot leather, when you buy boots, you'll have the smooth side showing out. A lot of times a smooth out saddle will have the smooth part of the leather out, so it's not rough. And then you can get a rough out saddle where it's the rough leather, and it just feels a little bit rougher than the smooth side. And the rough out actually gives you better grip in the saddle, especially if you're wearing a pair of chinks or a pair of chaps. That rough out's really going to help hold you into that saddle. I buy all of my saddles with at least a rough out seat because it helps me when I'm starting horses or, like I said, riding through some rough country. It just helps me stick on there a little bit better. This saddle was a rough out saddle. But it's, as you can see, you can probably see some light glinting off of it because it's been polished by my butt and my legs for so many hours and miles in the saddle that I have turned this rough out seat into a slick seat. But both of them are rough out. And like I said, my personal preference is a rough out seat just because it helps me stick in that saddle a little bit better. When you're looking at saddles, you'll also see differences in the cantle height. So this one, I think this one's a 4-inch cantle. This really holds me in the saddle. When I'm riding a lot of long hours, I really prefer this saddle because it just offers me more support. It's just more comfortable for me. And I just kind of sit in there, and it's like sitting in a pocket. I really enjoy this saddle. This saddle here, the cantle's a little bit lower than the other one, and it's just fine, and it is comfortable, but when I'm riding a long time, I still prefer the higher cantle. The lower cantle is really nice for if you're getting on and off your horse, for whatever you're doing. You have less to clear with your legs, so it might be a little bit easier to fork your leg over your horse if you have a short cantle on your saddle. But that's all personal preference. Now, when it comes to trees, you're going to hear terms like full quarter horse bars, semi-full quarter horse bars, semi-quarter horse bars, or quarter horse bars. And what that means is that the tree is wider. So, and I'm kind of having a hard time explaining this because there is no standardization in saddle trees. Even with the mass-produced saddles or the custom saddles, there is no guideline that says a full quarter horse tree is this wide or this wide. Generally, it's measured from here to here, but you can't measure that on a saddle that's already made. So if you see someone showing you measurements from here to here, then it doesn't really mean anything because the tree is actually wider than that. But there's no standardization in tree sizes. But full quarter horse are going to be, the widest trees. They're going to fit the horses. We call them mutton-withered horses, where they're pretty round in the back. They have big shoulders. And then the narrower the tree goes, which is going to be your semi or your quarter horse bars, means the narrower the saddle's going to be, the narrower the saddle tree's going to be. So the narrow saddles you're going to want for kind of your tent withers, horses that aren't as broad in the shoulders and have some prominent withers sticking up. This saddle is a kind of an off-the-shelf saddle, and it's full quarter horse bars. This one over here is a custom saddle, and they don't have a name for it. I just have measurements for it. But this one is much wider than this one. So I have a wide saddle, and then my full quarter horse bars I call my narrow saddle. And I ride my big horses in that saddle, and then my narrower horses that have kind of shark fin withers, I ride in this one here. So it just kind of depends on what fits the horse. When we're talking about quality of saddles, and people always ask me, well, what kind of saddle should I buy? You're talking to a guy that makes his living with these things. I have thousands and thousands of hours in these saddles, so I'm going to spend very, very good money on a very, very good saddle. This one here is probably If I were to replace this saddle, it'd be somewhere around $4,500, $5,000. I've had it for years. I have no plan on replacing it. This one here, I think, is an $1,800 saddle. But some things that I look for and that I would suggest you guys look for is all leather construction. You know, you'll see lots of saddles that are made out of Condura or nylon. I prefer all leather saddles. The saddle tree, you'll see a lot of saddles that they're getting real popular with, like they call them flex trees, or rawhide trees, or basically plastic trees. The trees in my saddles I like to be made out of wood and covered in rawhide. That makes them very strong, very firm. They support the horse, they support my weight on that horse, and they protect the horse's back from my weight. But everybody has their own budget, and so you can certainly, there's certainly a huge variance of saddles and degrees of saddles that you can buy. You can buy super expensive ones, super cheap ones. You can also buy used saddles. If you buy a used saddle from somebody, I'd highly recommend taking that saddle home, or even a new saddle. See if you can take it home on trial, or bring your horse to the person that's selling you the saddle. Make sure that saddle fits that horse. Make sure that saddle fits you. And if you don't know if the saddle fits your horse, then there's tons of saddle fitters out there that would be more than happy to come over and show you if that saddle fits or not. The other thing you're going to hear or read about when you're shopping for saddles is the rigging placement. So let me get my stirrup out of the way here. And what they mean by that, the rigging placement, is where this D-ring for your front cinch falls in line with these screws right here. So basically the front of your saddle. Most saddles these days are made with what they call a 7/8 rigging. An 8/8 rigging would be right underneath this screw. A 7/8 is a little bit further back. I think it's about an inch back. And then they can go back to, 5/8. The next size down is 5/8, which brings the front ring a little bit further back. And then they have center fire, or 3/4, and then center fire. So it goes, an 8/8 or a full rigging would be right under here. 7/8 a little bit further back. 5/8 a little bit further back. 3/4 a little bit further back. And you'll still see some center fire riggings, which means they don't have a rear cinch, but the front cinch, or the only cinch, is going to be right here in the middle of the saddle. Those don't fit too many horses these days, but you do see them. The most popular rigging placement that you're going to see is 7/8, which is what this one is and what that one is. And with that 7/8, you will need the rear cinch. But if you can find a 7/8 or even a 5/8, which places this ring just a little bit further back, you'll give your horse plenty of shoulder clearance, and it's not going to get in the way of the horse's shoulder movement. So 7/8 or even a 5/8 would be just fine. If I were to be recommending a saddle for people, I think I would probably recommend a Swell fork saddle, which we talked about already. So probably a Swell fork saddle and a little bit lower cantle, so it's easier to get on and off of your horse. The swells will help keep you in the saddle if you kind of get into a situation where your horse might be trying to get you out of the saddle. And then I would probably go for a rough out seat, just because it helps stick you in there a little bit better. Saddle brands, in this day and age, there's tons and tons of saddle makers. You can spend top dollar on a custom saddle. McCall saddles make great saddles. They're based out of Utah. They make phenomenal saddles. They're a little bit pricey, but they'll last you forever. And that's one thing, just like your tools. You spend money on good tools to last forever. Spend good money on your tack and take care of it, and it'll last you forever. So as far as brands to recommend, that big saddle of mine there, that's made by Out West Saddlery. They make phenomenal gear. You certainly pay for it. This one's made by a local guy down here called DC Western. Some other great saddles are Don Rich. He makes cutting and cow horse saddles. And then there's another one. Was it Rick Smith? Rick Smith saddles. He makes really good saddles that are pretty affordable. But I would just make sure that it's a wood, rawhide covered tree, all leather. And then some things to look for is just like make sure the stitching is straight, make sure you're looking at it and it looks quality, it looks good, and do your research, do some internet research and see what good quality saddle manufacturers are around you. So that's a little bit about saddles. I hope I answered some of your questions. If not, let me know. That's a little bit about saddles and kind of what I got for you on saddles. Hope you learned something. Thanks.